For me, it's indeed a great pleasure to have here with us the Honorable Dr. Karin Kneissl, and I must thank Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Austria, for making this possible. We've had a great thing going here. So let me begin by welcoming you, Madam, to the Observer Research Foundation. And as we just noted as we came in, that the acronym ORF must be very familiar to you, because you have been broadcasting, giving talks on the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation, which also has the same initials, ORF. So you are in familiar territory, so you can hold forth very easily. But it gives me special pleasure to welcome you here as the Foreign Minister of Austria. I mean, Austria is a country which has always played a unique role as a meeting point between the East and the West. In a world which is torn apart by so many differences, Austria has always managed to retain its role as the kind of moderating influence, trying to harmonize the discordant voices of the developed world and the developing world. It has been known to be a neutral venue, and Vienna has, for those reasons, always been the international capital of the world. Speaking about energy, I mean, two of the primary institutions, the International Atomic Energy Agency, when the whole program Atoms for Peace began, that is, Vienna was chosen as the headquarters for the IAEA. And then some years later, when OPEC was looking for a more congenial headquarters away from Geneva, they also chose to move to Vienna. So two primary organizations to do with energy are headquartered there. In many ways, they represent both the past, the present, and the future of energy in the world today. For our audience, as far as our guest speaker is concerned, Britta has already given you a brief bio, but let me just tell you some interesting snippets. After the government of Chancellor Kurz took office, Madam Karin Kneissl was nominated by the ruling FPO for the post of the federal minister, but she was nominated not as a party member. She was nominated as an independent. And in her thinking, in her views, she has always been independent. She's been a primary researcher. She has been talking about various kinds of issues. She has got extremely deep knowledge about the Middle East, and she knows the Middle East like few others. She studied law and oriental languages in the University of Vienna. Then she went on to do international relations both in Jerusalem and Amman. Her PhD also has been on the subject of international law and divisive borders. And that is what she worked on. And regularly, as Britta also told us, she has been talking about energy transitions, energy security, and the entire notion of the Middle East. On the subject itself, let me just say a brief, few words. We have all been turning on our TV screens for the last 2 months and watching the news flow. There is something very similar happening. If you look at the streets of Omdurman across the river Nile from Khartoum, and if you look at Paris, there's something very similar happening. As far as Sudan is concerned, ever since losing 75% of its oil revenues with the secession of South Sudan, the al-Bashir regime is struggling to manage a worsening financial situation. And you have street protests calling for his ouster. Cut across to Europe, and you find the streets of Paris have been taken over by the Yellow Vests. And one of the starting point, the trigger point for the Yellow Vest movement was actually eco-taxes or carbon taxes, which were imposed by President Macron. So both developed and developing nations are battling deep economic and social insecurity as they grapple with this problem of energy transitions. And the question keeps on being asked, are we living in a world with abundant energy? Or are we trapped in a Malthusian nightmare, facing a progressive scarcity of resources as time moves on? See, on the one hand, today, I don't think we have the Malthusian question anymore. Technology promises us abundant energy from an abundant variety of resources, both new and old. But at the same time, global attention has shifted from the quantity of energy to the quality of energy. And quality concerns today raise uppermost in everyone's mind. So while the Malthusian logic of energy transitions about energy scarcity may no longer be a concern as far as energy and economic security is concerned, we do need to take a very close, hard look at the logic of energy transitions. We need to consider the billions of lives and livelihoods which are often caught up at the wrong end of these transitions. Looking at India, we are also managing an energy transition, and time and time again it comes up to the same question. There is no point sometimes talking sustainability to people who don't even have primary access to electricity, who are condemned to burn dung and firewood to cook their one daily meal. So development and progress for them would still mean transitioning from dung and firewood to modern cooking fuels. And India typically then comes to inhabit multiple worlds. It is a country which is still making the transition beyond biomass, even as it builds some of the largest solar capacities anywhere in the world and at an unprecedented rate. We've just touched 75 gigawatts now, just in solar capacities. So the whole point is that the global energy system is huge. It is enormous, it is humongous. Just the advanced energy market represents a revenue of over $1.7 trillion a year. And within this market, there are a number of resources that can meet energy demand. The problem is, there is complete uncertainty in the way markets are going to move, or how technology shifts will disrupt the way energy is produced, transmitted, or consumed. Now, whether it be the shale revolution, which made USA the world's largest producer of oil just in a matter of 3-4 years, and completely upended the entire dynamics of oil pricing across the globe, or whether it be the changes being forecast for transportation in the next 5-10 years, when electric vehicles will start changing fuel use, and self-driving cars just change ownership patterns and how we start using transportation. And in these transitions, in these changes, businesses go bankrupt, people lose jobs, and peaceful citizens take to the streets. All this happens in the process of these transitions. The problem with energy policy always is that policy instruments can be extremely efficacious in creating the carrots and sticks that game fuel choices in one direction or the other. But they cannot control the disruptive impact of what energy economists understand only too well, and that is the impact of the marginal, of how seemingly very minor, well-intentioned interventions unleash a whole train of unintended and uncontrollable consequences, such as the ones we saw in Paris. Over time, yes, we know the energy consumption as well as the carbon intensity of every economy is going to decline. However, they will be within that transition. There's a phase as countries build that infrastructure, upgrade distribution networks, while keeping access to modern energy open, equitable, and affordable Now, those are the difficult choices. Because nations, societies, and people always have to grapple with that big question about what is the price they will need to pay if they start losing jobs and livelihoods, if they decline in global competitiveness, and lose access to markets by either miscalculating the pace of these transitions or countries not transiting at the same pace. So these differences can create a lot of problems in global competitiveness. But madam, I'll stop here. You have been writing about all these issues far more than I have. So I'll cede the floor to you, and then we will have a discussion after that. Thank you.
A very warm welcome also from my side. Actually, it's coming back to the Observer Research Foundation, and last time I was here, and thank you for the memories that you keep, was March 2007. And I'm very grateful to the Austrian Embassy and the ambassador of those days and his entire team, in particular Mr. Monish. And I'm very grateful also once again to the current team around Ambassador Brigitte Oeppinger-Reichshofer for having taken the opportunity of my brief, intense and very inspiring visit, coming back to India, this time not as the independent scholar traveling from one institute to the other, debating with students, but this time in a different capacity. And I simply enjoy combining my visits where possible with talks, whether it's at public universities or in think tanks and around think tanks, as is the case here today. So it's a sincere pleasure coming back. Many thanks to Dr. Yushid for your very kind remarks. Thank you also for Dr. Britta Pedersen for having introduced us. Yes, I still try to carry the hat of the scholar, because I miss it also somehow, writing. And the other day I had a dream. I was given 5 days in a library. It was a most wonderful dream I had, because it simply is this pleasure of dwelling into a subject and trying to see it from various angles, which we sometimes miss when we are operative in the world of diplomacy, operative in the world of foreign policy. And here, let me share with you from the very beginning a few key messages that I will then develop throughout my talk. First message, and you, the Chairman, already highlighted it in very clear words by bridging the topic from the Khartoum riots to French riots. It's all about energy prices, affordability of energy. Energy poverty is not a question of the Southern Hemisphere. We've seen it in the year 2013 in an EU member country like Bulgaria with the liberalization of the electricity market. We see it now, and I don't want to repeat your words, you have very well put the finger on the topic, and it's also interesting for me to see how an Indian scholar sees it, because to be very frank, in Europe, many of my colleagues don't see it in such a clean-shaped way what it is all about. So number one, the social question is back. When people were shouting in 1848, bread, it's today about affordability of energy, mobility. You're working quite a distance away from where you live. Why do people live in the periphery? Because they can't afford apartments in urban zones. When you cut down on public transport, and then when you levy an ecotax, for instance, that creates problems. So this is not a very complex question. It's only amazing that we saw what kind of vacuum it has filled. And a few weeks ahead of the European elections, 2-3 weeks ago, I don't follow the French news on a day-to-day basis, but what I read was the Yellow Vests want to present themselves also for the European elections, and without even having presented a single sentence of a program, according to polls, they could already obtain 12%. So you see the vacuum in the political landscape when it comes to established party systems or new parties, and France definitely is there a special case in this current framework that you already highlighted in the beginning. Apart from the social question that is back in full swing, we of course have the constant factor of geography, geopolitics. Whenever we talk about energy, it's not that you can simply discuss it through the glasses of market forces, supply and demand. Yes, supply and demand are at the basis of the building of oil price, at the basis when we try to understand policy making in a responsible position. Where do we head for? What kind of long-term supply deliveries do you work for? But it's not about market forces exclusively. It's always about geopolitics. And that holds true for each and every country. It's not only where we have, I often hear the catchword, well, Gazprom is only a subsection of the Kremlin. Holds true for many stock-listed international oil companies. I don't want to go into detail here right now, but maybe we can discuss it. It holds true for many, many oil companies. Energy companies, as they prefer to call each other today, because one doesn't want to be a dirty oil company, you prefer to call yourself a more inspiring energy company. We've seen it with BP. Beyond Petroleum was the notion as of 2003, when the disaster happened in 2010. Beyond Petroleum was not anymore so much at stake. When President Obama gave his speech from the Oval Office, he explicitly called it British Petroleum, to also make a point between a British oil company and a man-made disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. So there's always politics in the whole thing. It's never just a matter of market forces. This is the second message. And the third message that I would like to start from the beginning, so that we keep some red line in it, is also in today's world, it's not only anymore about war and peace, alliances, confrontations in the energy market. To quote former Saudi Minister of Oil, who happened to be during the 1970s the most renowned, the most well-known Saudis abroad, but was his that led them to a certain disadvantage for his further career, Saki Yamani. He said back in the mid-70s, oil alliances are stronger than Catholic marriages. You simply can't undo them. And whatever has been established, whether it was in the 1930s or in later stages in terms of pipeline agreements, delivery agreements, they are still there and they have their point, even in today's international relations. So, having said all that, let me go into the details, which is more focused on today's situation or in this part of the world. We have to tackle today on a global scale, as was already mentioned, development and providing energy for a growing world population on one side. On the other side, it's all about sustainability, an inflationary term I'm very much aware of, but in that context, I dare to say it's all about merely the survival of mankind, or in other words, keeping Mother Earth, as the Foreign Minister told me yesterday, a planet, a place where good life and civilized societies are still possible. The Minister for Foreign Affairs of India and myself, we dwelled quite some time on climate change and what it means also for international relations on a larger level. Two topics characterize every discussion about the future of global energy structures. First, a rise in demand over the next 2 decades, especially when it comes to electricity. And second, and here we are, this is the not new, but in the equation of the large topic, a relatively new topic, it's all about combating climate change. Global energy demand will rise by about 40% in the next 20 years. This is due to a predicted global population growth from today 7.4 billion to more than 9 billion in the year 2040. No surprise that the rise in energy demand is mostly concentrated on regions that expect especially high population growth, 2/3 in Asia and 1/3 Middle East, Africa and Latin America. The largest contribution to demand growth, namely almost 30%, comes from India, whose share of global energy use will rise to 11% by 2040. You are set to overtake China as the largest growing market for energy by the end of the 2020s. And let me briefly recall here on the topic of China 2 interesting figures. Until the year 1994, the People's Republic of China was capable to satisfy its domestic consumption by national oil production. We're speaking here of 3.5 to 4 million barrels a day, which was, until the year 1994, sufficient for domestic consumption. In the year 2015, if I correctly recall, China had overtaken Japan and then the United States, that was before the shale oil boom, as #1 importer. So this gives you just a little illustration of where we stand when it comes to Chinese growth, and of course also its current role in the world of oil and gas. I've been saying for the last 15 years, pipelines and airlines turn east, not west. And ever since 2006, when we compare the figures of the OECD, International Energy Agency, the demand is an eastern demand. We, in particular in the European area, are not so important as customers. And that is for me also an important fact. I will briefly mention it here, we can later discuss it. But when it comes to North American shale oil and gas, the better prices are paid in Shanghai and not in Rotterdam. The very advantage that you have as an LNG producer, you can ship the vessel wherever the price is higher, and you can change the schedule within a day. While when you have pipelines, we all know it, you are bound by arrangements which often last up to 25 years. So there is an advantage for an LNG producer to ship it, and ever since the technology of liquefying and regasifying were developed, the market has become a global one. It's not anymore a local or regional, and that was the revolutionary aspect of it, apart from many other aspects that have already been mentioned at the beginning. Since 2010, India's population has increased by more than 100 million, and its gross domestic product has grown at an annual average of 6.8%, while, for example, demand for electricity has swelled by 7.7% a year. In 2017, of the total consumption of electricity in India, in the industry sector, accounted the largest share, 40%, followed by domestic consumption, 24%, agriculture, 18%, and the commercial sectors, 9%. Just let me also mention here, digital economies also run on fossil energy. You need for social networks quite a high volume of fossil energy that don't run by air. Households have been a strong driver of electricity demand growth, reflecting a strong policy push. Over 500 million people in your country have gained electricity access since 2000. In addition, higher levels of income have allowed households to purchase more appliances. Almost 40% of households now own a refrigerator, compared to 25% in 2010. What is good for individuals and households is unfortunately not so good for our climate. The energy sector is currently the principal source of global greenhouse gas emissions. The International Energy Agency predicts that even with current global policies and pledges to fulfill the well-known goals we all know from the Paris Agreement, CO2 emissions will keep rising gradually until 2040. Transport and industry are likely to be the main factors in this respect. And let me mention here at this stage, the energy transition that was decided by the German government in 2011 is an electricity transition. We speak of 30% of the total energy consumption. It's not yet included transport. And transport is the name of the game when we speak of today's efforts how to tackle the manifold challenges and climate change. Please note that according to the Global Gas Outlook, which actually we happened to have the honor to present in Vienna a few weeks ago, the share of fossil fuels in global energy consumption will only fall slightly from today's level. Fossil fuels counted for 81% of total energy consumption in 2017, and this share will fall to approximately 75% in 2040. At first glance, these figures look indeed bleak, but they hide at least somewhat positive trends. Strong population growth does not mean that CO2 emission will rise equally strong. This is due to the spectacular rise of renewables, rising energy efficiency, And this is now the main point I would like to highlight, the gradual substitution of coal by gas. When I came to India first time and I did my series of lecture, I looked very closely at the coal consumption that is not specific to India. We also have it in China, we have it in many areas, countries of the region. And the energy transitions that are undertaken by various EU countries, the very ambitious goals that the EU has set as a whole, it all has to do with how we can substitute coal by gas. Renewables are rising from a very low base, and they are needed. They work for smaller municipalities, but when it comes to reliable energy on an industrial level, my guess is we will have to rely much more on gas. Ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning of this month, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development presented a study, and you might have read it. It shows in an alarming way the effects climate change would have on this region here, the Himalaya Hindu Kush region, if we do not manage to achieve the Paris climate goals. Even in the case we fully implement the goals, 1/3 of the glaciers will melt until the end of the century. However, if we fail completely, it will be half of the glaciers. Now, I always have my skepticism when it comes to these kind of predictions, but we have seen, at least I've seen in the span of my lifetime, the rise of weather extremes. And whenever I presented the Global Vulnerability Index to climate change in my previous classes, I pointed out the vulnerability that we have in this part of the world. With the big difference that when there are natural disasters in Southern Asia, we're not speaking of an insured value that is hit. While when we have a Katrina in the US, we speak about insurances that are also hit. And having worked with insurance companies over the last few years and their tremendous and growing interest in CO2-free emission investments, it is due to the fact, whether you speak with Allianz Group or with other big companies, they are paying a heavy price, and it simply makes a difference whether property that is insured and paid back by an insurance company is hit, or whether it's just the cows of a farmer in Southern Asia, or just the rice fields somewhere that in this part of the world which were not covered by an insurance. So even worse, India is a country prone to natural disasters, extreme weather events could threaten to become the new normal, and this, as we know, not only in India, but it's Southern Asia, it's the Caribbean, it's the Eastern Mediterranean, and to a certain extent it's also Northwestern Europe that are mostly hit when you look at the Global Vulnerability Index. From all this, it becomes clear that energy transition is the energy topic of our time, and we have to do something with it if we want to keep Mother Earth continue. The Paris Agreement provides us with the guideline to reach this goal. However, if we want to take the task seriously, it's essential that we plan long-term and we start implementing appropriate measures. But let me be, and here I thank you for your perfect introduction, clear and realistic. Climate, economy, technology, and affordability have all to be taken into account. And there is a tendency to lose the interconnectivity of all that. You're sometimes stunned at the absence of realism that is there with very important decision makers. And I've seen them, unfortunately, too often take the very wrong decisions, being out of touch with reality, being out of touch what it means to pay and to afford energy and mobility. I think that India is aware of all those challenges and on a good path. It was your Prime Minister who was named last year Champion of the Earth, according to the UN's highest environmental honor, for his pioneering work in championing the International Solar Alliance and promoting new ideas of levels of cooperation when it comes to environmental action. Nevertheless, India, as the rest of the world, still has a lot of work to do. Right now, your energy sector, we all know it, is still dominated by coal. And we have to be honest, striking a balance between fighting pollution and decarbonizing the economy, while at the same time upholding economic growth, is a Herculean task. Furthermore, it is clear that the transition to sustainable energy sources will not happen overnight. While trying to find the right path for transit to sustainable energy, every path will inevitably lead via a cleaner energy system, via a bridge energy source. According to the International Energy Agency last World Energy Outlook, gas will play a major role as a source of future energy. 2040, the consumption of gas will be 40% higher than it is today. The International Energy Agency even predicts that gas will overtake coal as the world's second largest energy source within the next 10 years, because king coal is still with us. It has even grown in its importance. Coal emissions have risen also in Germany because of the energy transition. When there is no backup for renewables, it's the coal-fired power plants that are opened, and that is the paradox of the entire enterprise. Despite of progressing public policies designed to reduce carbon emissions and a sharp fall in the cost of producing power from, for example, solar, wind, renewables won't be able to cover demand in the medium term. And we always come back to the issue of reliability. Winston Churchill, who was very much interested in the topic of oil, was explained by Mr. Samuelson, who actually was the founder of Royal Dutch Shell, about the reliability and efficiency of oil. You have a complete breakdown of the grid, you put on your diesel generator, and you can continue operating in a surgery room. You can continue making your hotel clients feel at ease. So there is still a gap, and we are still waiting for the innovative breakthrough when it comes to stocking of electricity. And also here we have seen the various paths that were taken actually in the promotion of electricity, the various forms of currents in the late 19th century in the United States. Daniel Jürgen, in his book, The Quest, has written extensively about it. And sometimes it's very strange decisions by human society that opt for a certain decision. The ideas of Edison were not implemented. It were the ideas of Mr. Westinghouse and Tesla and new forms of electricity, which led from decentralized power stations to mega power stations, which today are questioned for the vulnerability. So despite progressing public policies designed to reduce carbon emissions and a sharp fall in the cost of producing power from all that renewables, the demand cannot be covered. Austrian energy policy is a good example. We are currently producing 75% of our electricity from renewable sources, in particular water and wind. Our goal is to raise this share to 100% by 2030. In the overall Austrian energy mix, renewables account for roughly 33%, which is, compared to other countries in Europe, already fairly good. But for transport, and this is the name of the game, warming and cooling and electricity, we still have to import quite a lot of energy from other sources, especially gas, and we will have to continue to do so. So, ladies and gentlemen, having drawn on some aspects of the energy transition, let me come to one aspect which is, so it has recently come to the limelight in Europe, still not on everybody's mind, and this is a serious mistake. French government having introduced additional taxes on petrol to reduce CO2 emissions, but suddenly the Frenchman could no longer afford to drive to work, bring their children to school every day. Every year, Austrians pay around 800 billion euro in green electricity gas taxes, which amounts to around 800 euros per capita. And if I'm not mistaken, that corresponds to approximately 900 US dollars. Otherwise, renewable energy sources would not be available for the same extent. This is a considerable burden for consumers and the economy. For an average family of 4 people, we talk of about $3,600 per year. So if Austria, a highly industrialized country, can barely afford the energy transition, the obvious question is, how will others manage to do it? These figures and examples show us very clearly that resolving the ecological question will not automatically resolve the social question as well. However, how can we combine the ecological question with the social one? Without affordability, there won't be public acceptance. Without public acceptance, the energy transition can't happen. So amid the global transition towards a sustainable energy world, we are in need of a bridge fuel. Until renewables, efficiency measures, storage possibilities and new technologies are developed sufficiently to reach climate goals and are affordable for the broader public. The answer, and I have already underlined this, might lay in natural gas, being an alternative. Natural gas is the bridge fuel for the future. There are many different technologies being explored these days that might help making even cleaner and proper solutions when it comes to the emissions. You might have heard of the carbon capture storage technologies, which are still in an experimental stage. And there are various other forms of enhancing the recovery rate, in particular when it comes to exploration. Another promising technology on the horizon is to separate hydrogen from methane, the main component of natural gas, to use it for emission-free energy production and the remaining carbon for industry purposes. The Vienna University of Technology is also working very much into polygeneration, transforming waste into hydrogen and thereby creating another form of green hydrogen, not grey hydrogen that you would get from natural gas. During our chairmanship of the European Union, we put this technology on the agenda, and the European Union has decided to massively support research. I've encountered many scholars, engineers who are very much in the hydrogen sector, in particular when it comes to the automotive sector. Problem is still acceptability, distribution grid. The 2 countries where we have higher community of scientists, not for surprise, are South Korea and Israel. Why? There is no transit traffic. Austria, sorry, we are very much a transit country. So all these new technologies have 2 things in common. They still need research, they need time. However, it makes sense to rethink the renewable only energy future, if I may put it like that, under inverted comma. And I hope I won't be completely misunderstood by this little bit thought-provoking approach. If we aim too high, we run the risk to miss our target, namely a socially acceptable energy transition. We have to take into consideration technical and economic constraints, not to mention social ones. Gas might be an important bridge fuel, maybe clean gas with the help of new technologies. So for now, it might be a dream for the future. It's a question of research and innovation, and I hope that we will spend more of our political energy, in particular in Europe, on research and innovation, and not waste time and money and nerves with other topics which are currently top of our agenda. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed your talk. I was reading one of the articles you had written in 2010, and you made a remark that none of the economists, Adam Smith, Marx or Keynes, took into account the cost of energy. And the remarks Dr. Joshi and Her Excellency made on affordability proves this, that the economists forgot to take into account the cost of energy. I just would like to reinforce something that you said, that is the role of technology. Just highlight 3 aspects The first is energy efficiency, how energy efficiency has altered energy demand. In the 20th century, energy demand grew at about 3%, which is roughly the same as the growth of GDP. In the 21st century, energy demand is likely to grow at about 1%, roughly half that of GDP growth. So this is all due to efficiency gains on account of technology. Renewables, once again, is a product of technology and policy. We should not forget that. It is mainly policy driven. And you will all know that renewable energy capacity since 2012 is more than that of traditional capacity, but this is only capacity, not actual generation. And in 2017, the capacity for solar exceeded coal plus nuclear globally. And the third trend, which the speaker mentioned, is electrification. The future, everybody knows, is going to be electrifying, even in transport possibly. And today it's about 19% of final consumption, future probably about 30%. And in 2017, investment in power, electricity, was greater than that of oil and gas for the first time. I'll also make some remarks about India because most of us are interested in what is happening in India today. We've spoke about energy transitions. India is probably the only country which is making 3 simultaneous transitions. One is the efficiency transition, that is efficiency in allocating capital and so on. Many of you will know that India has been seen as a state-led country with state leading energy investment decisions with fairly inefficient allocation of capital and resources. So the first transition is from state-led to a market-led system, and this is based on state failure to deliver efficient energy. And the second transition India is making is, which was also mentioned by both the speakers, is an energy access transition, which is an energy redistributed transition. This perversely is based on market failure to deliver energy access to the poor. And it is largely state-led. Most of you know that all the policies for energy access are state-led, both for electricity access and access to cooking fuels are state-led, and they are based on fossil fuels. The last transition is a low-carbon transition. This is also based on market failure to provide environmental goods. And this transition is also led by the state, offering a number of incentives for renewable energy and so on. I would just like to highlight one point that you mentioned, that is the role of natural gas in electricity generation. India is probably the only country where natural gas is, the probability of natural gas making inroads into coal-based power generation is seen as very low. And in this, I would like to highlight one aspect, the role of the state in promoting renewable energy as low-carbon energy, and the absence of the state in the natural gas sector. Natural gas sector is expected to follow market principles and make inroads as a clean fuel, which is not happening in India. On the contrary, state-supported renewable energy is making inroads into power sector, which is dominated by coal. So this highlights probably the role of the state in promoting a clean energy transition. I think many of you will recall the chief banker in India made a statement recently, 2 months ago, that there is absolutely no role for natural gas in the power sector in India. And this was a banker talking, because he was worried about financing natural gas-based projects. So the 2 low-carbon sources for power generation, one is natural gas and the other renewable energy. One is succeeding, the other is failing, and the difference, primary difference, is the role of the state. And in this respect, I would like to highlight the role of the state. In the fossil fuel era, everybody said that the dominance of the state in the energy sector in India and China was the biggest problem. You know, the effort was to reduce the role of the state and bring in the role of the market. But in the low carbon era, everybody is celebrating the role of the state. For example, the Solar Alliance and so on, the subsidies. how China has managed to reduce the cost of renewable energy, particularly solar, through state intervention in allocation of resources. So this is a paradox, and I leave it at that, and perhaps the audience can enact it.
Very interesting.
We'll open this up for question answers, but Excellency, after the excellent talk, I have a question which I think we can start the discussion with. And I take off from what Lydia ended with, the role of the state. Now, you have been writing as a researcher, now you're part of the government. You play an active role as a policy maker. When it comes down to state-led policies, government-led policies on energy transitions, why is it that governments, instead of following policies which are technology agnostic, I really think the role of policy should be to decide on the end goals, should be to decide how clean should be the fuel which is burned right at the burner tip. And accordingly, you can move from more polluting fuels, high carbon intensity fuels, low carbon intensity fuels, to zero intensity fuels, and accordingly create systems of incentives for that kind of system. Is there a problem arising in Europe also that incentives for transitioning are no longer technology agnostic? That you're first making a choice of technologies and then starting to say that, oh, we should be supporting A over B or C over D. We should not be looking at gas at all. We should not be looking at clean coal burning mechanisms. We should not be looking at various other options which can actually do a massive lot to reduce the overall carbon footprint. For example, one very simple example. A 1% increase in the efficiency of a coal-fired plant actually removes from the atmosphere every year the entire emissions of a country like Belgium. But in many cases, there are no incentives or no finance to be able to do these things. So what do you see the role of the state should be if you start talking of the future transitions, and when you start talking about how should climate negotiations be proceeding? What is the way forward?
Thank you very much, sir. Well, I am now intruding a little bit into the ambit which is in the competence of a government colleague, Minister Elisabeth Köstinger, who is in charge of energy, but it's an interministerial topic. It's like integration into, it's not only the topic of one ministry, foreign affairs interfere, infrastructure, innovation, research interfere, so it's a topic that affects us all. So I may intrude in here and answer your very interesting, stimulating question as follows. What I would look for, where we as a state have to be, it's fact-based, no ideology, no emotions. Because this topic has become very ideological and very emotional.
If you have some questions before, just please introduce yourselves and ask a question. Yes.
My name is Vinod Sagal, Madam Minister. I am Executive Director of Eco-Monitor Society that deals with the demographic global interface nationally and globally. As you mentioned, the main problem before humanity are climate change and global warming. One deals with energy, which is the main culprit, so to say. Now, many countries are going in for nuclear reactors as one of the answers. As you said, we are looking at one way. The cost of a reactor today, when you talk of decommissioning 50, 60 years later, maybe an order of magnitude, I won't prolong it, look at Fukushima, several orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
Secondly, Stephen Hawking, before dying, or sometime back, mentioned that he gives human society or humanity not more than 2 decades, 20 years. And the reason he gave was climate change or nuclear weapons.
And artificial intelligence.
Nuclear weapons.
And he also mentioned artificial intelligence.
Yes. And preferably is most likely the latter. If that be the case, we are going in for nuclear energy, not taking in cost of decommissioning and look at the proliferation of nuclear weapons. What happened to the nuclear, the peace treaty and all that? So therefore, this is the biggest danger for us. As for the second year, whatever you like to say.
Well, sir, you're speaking to somebody who comes from this strange country called Austria, where exactly 40 years ago we had a referendum. It was in 1978, December 1978, whether we would open or not would open up a fully fledged nuclear power plant that was there. And there was an ecological movement, it was domestic politics that interplayed a lot. And we never opened it. And this nuclear power plant today serves inter alia as a museum and as a spare part reservoir. So if there is one other nuclear power plant at the other side of the globe in dire need of a certain spare part, we can provide it. So this is a very specific situation of Austria, which inside the European Union is well known for its very specific position. And as a teacher in energy, I often was intrigued by the fact that teaching the same topic, exactly the same syllabus, in Germany or in France, what a difference, you know? We don't have something that you can call a common energy policy, we don't even have a common energy mentality. Because the French think in a completely different way about nuclear than the Germans and the Austrians do. And so you're here in a cultural sphere, you're not only in a political sphere of whether we can create something like that. So this just at the outset. And I may agree with everything what you have said, not only for the sake that I happen to be Austrian, but also because of my own convictions. But I'm also very well aware of the fact that many voices claim it's affordable energy, it is right now also in the outphasing of nuclear power plants in Germany, it's a big issue, again about the electricity price for the industry and the decommissioning. For instance, in some EU countries, some power plants are under pressure to be decommissioned, but the respective government does not have the money to decommission. And we are speaking of fairly advanced EU industrial states.
Yeah, Manish Sharma from Accenture. My basic question is that what are your views on the mega projects like Belt and Road initiative, which are going to promote a lot of, these coal-fired plants, coal dumping and all, and industries are going to generate power from there for a lot of decades, And my second question is that what do you advocate as far as India is concerned regarding decarbonizing carbon, things like carbon tax, this cap and trade programs and carbon trading and all. Do you think that will help in reducing this coal and fossil fuels?
There's not one silver bullet solution. It's a mix of solutions. It has a lot to do with the role of the state. It has to do with incentives, with taxes. The state can put some legal framework. It has to do with international relations. You mentioned the One Belt, One Road and the role of coal-fired power plants that apparently walk in tandem with the expansion. Sometimes you need very quickly a power plant, so coal is there. Coal is spread. That's why I come back to Winston Churchill when he was Lord of the Admiralty and he took the decision back in 1911 to switch from coal to diesel for the British Navy. Everybody in his cabinet said, are you crazy? We've got coal in Wales, where do we get oil from? Then they took Mesopotamia and through the pipelines and then the borders, and the Middle East was shaped and reshuffled by the British in the sense of having physical access to the easy to reach oil fields of what is today northern Iraq, Kirkuk, Mosul, the oldest next to Baku in terms of industrial oil production. So it will always be a mix of different answers, and we see with what you have just highlighted, it's not an easy question and it is with us.
we talk of warfare, 4 generations of cyber, and psychological. Is it true that China is utilizing energy resources to influence climate change all across the globe, and they launch an altogether different warfare?
No, I've never heard of that theory, and that's why I'm not going to comment it. I'm a fact-based person, sometimes too much fact-based.
I'm Rajiv Sodi, I'm a technology consultant. You talked about switching from fossil to gas, but there are still limited resources of gas. And if you do talk about solar and wind, it's almost unlimited amount of energy available. So the focus, I don't see a big role of state in generating storage technology, which is the main hindrance in using renewable like solar and wind, and which can then be assured.
I hope I was not misunderstood. I spoke about it. The issue is you always need a backup when the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining. So what kind of backup? And the big the challenge that we have is how you stock electricity. This is the challenge. So the person who will come up with that innovation, that will make the revolution. But we don't have it, the stocking of electricity.
My question is that there's not enough research sponsored by the state in this case.
I don't know whether there's not enough research. Maybe we don't have any more, and I'm not a natural scientist, so it's easy for me to comment that with a taste of arrogance, and I apologize if I might sound arrogant, but 9 out of 10 stock listed companies, for instance in Germany, date from before World War I. We still profit from the innovation, from the research that was done in the late 19th century, early 20th century, in all areas. In particular when it comes to transport and energy. So what we miss in today's world, and when I talk to people who are in the scientist community, is you miss passion, obsession that you sometimes need. As Thomas Alva Edison put it, genius is 90% of perspiration, 10% of inspiration. Less 9-to-5 research. That is something that I miss and people miss. And less constant evaluation. When I speak to people who are in the scientific community, tell me we spend a terrible amount of our time in evaluating our work instead of really doing our work. So there's overregulation, and there is no venture capital. That is also something, especially after 2008. We are now with the low interest rate situation that we especially have in the Eurozone. Money is not going into innovation, money is going into real estate, unfortunately. So we lack all that. But it's easy for me to say because I'm not within the scientific community. But when I talk to people who are in there, that's what they suffer from.
Hi, Amitabh Kumar from AppChat. My question is more on the volatility in hydrocarbon prices. We've seen a lot of volatility, and I was thinking if you had any views that going forward, how do you see that volatility, and what do you see as the source of that volatility, market forces, geopolitics, and if there are some thoughts on what would be a solution that sort of feeds into affordability.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir. Very essential question. If I had a PowerPoint here at my side, I would show you a graph showing that until 1973, no volatility. The oil price was so stable. You can look it up in the BP energy books and that. It's very nice. If you start with the graph from the 1870s when oil entered the market, very stable. 1973, geopolitics, Yom Kippur War. 1979, revolution in Iran, another time, geopolitics. Breaking down, oversupply, North Sea oil, peak in demand, revolution in the transport sector, the Hyundai cars instead of the American 20-liter car. So a lot of changing, and here we are speaking of geopolitics and market forces. Plus, ever since the mid-1990s, we have an additional factor, which is the financial market. 70% of the portfolio of huge investment houses are placed in oil futures. And oil futures were a very useful instrument in order to address peaks, demand, supply, making shipping easier. It was meaningful before it went into something that I know some people are allergic against the term, but let me simply call it what it is, speculation.
Good evening, and I'm an independent consultant on international trade and investment. My name is Nivedita Mukherjee. I have two questions for you. President Trump has told OPEC that oil prices are too high, and secondly, given China's slowdown and its consumption of course, energy, do you really see that really happening, and what's your outlook on that?
Thank you very much. The US fracking industry could not have the successes it has right now if the oil prices didn't have the level they have. So whoever advised the president on that was maybe misinformed, because it's the fracking industry has to work. It depends on the shale product that you have. But for instance, in the Texan Eagle fields, the price where it becomes commercial lies at around $30 to $40 US. When you go up to the further north, it goes up to $50 to $70 US per barrel exploration cost. So an oil price that before 2014 was average $150 US per barrel was one of the manufacturers that was behind the rise of the United States and of Canada as a producer and exporter of shale oil and shale gas. With the price drop as of autumn 2014, summer 2014, $150 per barrel, November 2014, 30. So there was a tremendous decline by 2/3, which had many reasons. One was the oversupply, the success of the fracking industry against the backdrop of a fairly constant high price level. And on the other side, we had, as of 2014-15, interestingly enough, despite highly intense geopolitics, Islamic State in important transit countries like Syria, production country like Iraq, despite a fully fledged confrontation between Ukraine and Russia, 2014. Against all odds, we had a declining price, and the fracking industry was also suffering from that. They closed one project after the other. So honestly, I don't understand that statement by President Donald Trump, because the fracking industry needs fairly high oil price.
Just one last question, I'm sorry, we don't have enough time. Yeah, right away.
Good evening, ma'am. My name is Rajiv Saxena. I have a question for you. I'm just wondering, if Latin America becomes the new Middle East after the interventions, or supposedly follow forward, as far as between the USA and Eritrea.
I didn't get the question, sorry.
The question is that we will see in the Latin American region, especially in the Venezuela crisis, it will become the new Middle East.
I got it. Interesting hypothesis. I've been saying from the very first day I was asked by Austrian media and others, Venezuelan crisis, first element I always brought in, apart from the known problems that we have on a political and on a domestic societal level, Venezuela is #1 in terms of reserves. It has more reserves than Saudi Arabia. When you put together conventional, if I may say easy to drill, low exploration costs, plus unconventional, which is the famous fracking gas, shale oil, tar sands. Venezuela is number one in terms of reserves. It's a hypothesis that people have written essays about and maybe even books, I'm not aware of, but it's a topic. You're fully right to highlight that.
Thank you. I'm sorry, we don't have enough time. We are running out of the scheduled allotted time. So let me thank you, Ms. Kneissl, for that very innovative talk. And see the key points which you highlighted. Energy is today not really discussed in terms of the broader transitions. The fact is that energy is not one commodity. Energy is a basket of multiple commodities. And every country which is using energy uses this basket in one form or the other. The shares may vary, and the shares may transition. Some, according to market, shares will rise or fall, depending on how prices move, depending on how technology moves, but energy always remains a basket. And going into the future, we are also going to be looking at ways of managing how this basket is to be configured, and the role of policy has to be to keep pace with technology, with markets, with what is happening around us, because it's a key factor in competitiveness between nations. Your manufacturing competitiveness, where you stand in the global markets, depends on what is going to be the price of energy in your country. Countries with cheap energy policies, such as China for many, many years, captured a whole lot of global markets on the back of very low subsidized energy prices they were giving to the manufacturing industry. So it is a complex mix that we are looking at. Therefore, the need to take a much broader composite view of the process of transition and start discussing energy, climate, and development as a common basket where we can look at these transitions. Thank you so much for being here. We welcome you the second time and probably the third time again. I hope you can join us next time for Rising Dialogues.
Yes, with great delight. Thank you for all ladies and gentlemen who took your afternoon time to stay here with us. And my sincere thanks go to Ambassador Brigitte Oettinger-Walshofen and her team who made it happen that I can be here with you today again. And 10 years later, unfortunately, I think we still discuss the same things we discussed 10 years ago. We have not yet learned our lesson, but I hope that we keep our emotions for other topics and not for energy. We have to be passionate and emotional about other aspects of life and deal with energy in a much more rational way.